My guest today is Shawn Smith. He's an interesting guy. He's been on here before. You can listen to his old podcast that it was on a while back. Anyway, this time he's talking about the bear community. It's almost like a history lesson in bearishness. You're going to like it. Give a listen. Greetings. Today I'm back again with Shawn Smith. He was here, a month ago?
Yep.
Something like that. We're going to continue the conversation. He has some other things he wants to say. Shawn, why don't you first of all say hi to my peeps?
Hi, how are you doing?
And then why don't you give us just a couple highlights of your last conversation to bring people who haven't heard it up to speed.
All right. Well, I talked about my own personal coming out, growing up in a small farming community and not really having any role models of what it meant to be gay. Initially, I fiddled around when I hit puberty with a few of my friends, but with my Catholic upbringing, I knew that behavior wrong, so I turned it off for a handful of years. And it wasn't until I left home and moved off to college that things kind of opened up and the potential to truly become who I am became possible. There, I met gay activist on campus and found an opportunity to connect with the gay community, the small gay community that was there, and become part of what was going on. So I became his right-hand man. It was almost a default position, became president of the nascent gay campus organization at the time and helped them pull off events, whether that was potlucks, getting speakers to come to the college, or going out into the community and doing presentations. That was a great start to not only coming out myself, but connecting and being able to meet so many other people. That continued for several years. I eventually moved up to the Twin Cities to Minneapolis. A lot of us in our coming out process were forced to go to big cities in order to get the anonymity, the freedom to just be ourselves without worrying what other people like in small towns would think. Whether it's to find the bar scene or just other opportunities in that, a lot of people are forced to migrate. And there, hopefully, they find a much larger gay community and they can find their place within that. I had told you about how eventually I ended up working at the bathhouse in the Twin Cities. And it was a challenging time because AIDS was actually already spreading throughout the community. And I talked about how I was there kind of at ground zero and witnessed some of the devastation as many of my friends became ill and died while the medical community was still trying to figure out what they were dealing with and how to move forward with that. So ultimately, it kind of left me in a position, kind of wrap this up, of my friends, my community on broad levels kind of got wiped out. And by the late 80s, all of us were like, how do we move on from this? How do we continue on after all that loss?
So I have a question. I guess I didn't ask you this. So you said you had a couple hundred guys you knew that died, correct?
Literally,
in
yes.
The last episode.
I was at the center. I've always been, once I connected to that gay community, I'd been right at the epicenter at it. I knew.
So my question is, did you have any guilt that you didn't die?
Yes.
How'd you deal with that?
Well, there is survivor's guilt. Part of that is, why me? Because I have been a frisky fella, obviously, with my friends during puberty, to even end up working at the bathhouse, and Lord knows I played at the bathhouse. And I'm like many of us who are frisky, I've been with 1,000 men or more in my life.
Wow.
Yeah. For me, and this is kind of interesting, I see the way men interact. Maybe to back it up, we're not taught as gay men how to love each other. We had role models of what it's like to find a girl and get engaged and get married and raise a family.
Right.
But we didn't have that message of how do you love another man? And so if I had a do-over in life, possibly in my career, that's something that I would have taught or held classes or courses on, seminars on. But men, we're a lot like dogs. You know, we meet each other, we sniff each other, and then we get to know each other kind of through that, and you become kind of a known entity. So for a lot of guys, just playing together, sometimes it's only once, and you have a physical encounter with somebody, and then you go, okay, I know who you are, and I know where within our tribe or within the hierarchy and rank of the pack where we stand.
So in our pre-interview chat that we just had, you were talking about your involvement with bears.
Right.
People listening may not know what a bear is, so we have all these nicknames for each other in the gay community. What's a bear?
Okay. Well, bears are generally kind of husky, stocky, to some degree older gay men who tend to be bearded and or hairy. And within the bigger aspect of the gay community, we weren't necessarily a hot commodity. The early gay culture was very much the Greek Adonis, youth. We are a youth-oriented culture. And that's kind of hard to perceive here in Palm Springs because we're all, older and retirees, you
right.
know.
Well, not everybody, but a lot, yeah.
But much of gay culture revolves around youth and a youthful appearance and things like that. And so to be clean shaven and smooth and have a six-pack ab and to be cute and young and pretty, was really idealized for the longest, even back to Greek culture, right? Adonis, that kind of thing.
And those were the guys that died.
In a lot of ways, and I certainly saw working at the bathhouse, it was a fascinating social study in men because I saw thousands of men pass by. And I can honestly say I saw some of the most ordinary, ugliest men with the most beautiful hearts and souls. I saw some of the most beautiful men, well hung. They had it all, build, muscle, everything, that were ugly inside. And so I saw the entire strata. And for myself personally, I learned to see beauty in all of it and appreciate that across the spectrum. The bears were kind of left out of that scene, though. We also had, we had the drag queens who project beauty and elegance and class, even though within gay culture, within the broad straight culture, they're kind of like low-life creatures. They are others. They aren't even real, right?
I think that's changing, though, don't you think? With RuPaul and everything.
Yes, and that's a good thing. But imagine, even the drag queens, Miss Tiffany Cartier, their drag names, Portia whatever, they aspired to luxury. Almost a lot of drag names are like luxury brand, high-class items for people who are viewed by broad society as low-life scum that can't even figure out whether they're a man or a woman, right? And that. But we had these predefined strata within the gay community. The Leathermen had their hyper masculine sexuality. We had the twinks, the pretty boys, had their Adonis-like qualities. The drag queens had their sparkling, done to the nines glamour and elegance kind of thing. And there were a lot of very ordinary guys kind of standing on the sidelines going, what about us? And that's where the bears really fit in. Another thing is even some of us, I'm a thin-boned guy. I'm pretty tall and lean, so I may be considered, or at least when I was young, an otter or a wolf type. But as we age, we all tend to put on weight. We get hairier and things like that. So on some levels, bearish guys tend to be something that happens later in life. They become more bearish as they age. And that's pretty much normal. In the straight world, I guess, the dad bod is kind of a hot trend, that as we age, our bodies round and fill out more, and that's pretty much normal.
But a bear would be chunkier than that even.
Yeah.
Generally.
And there's some divide. It turns out any culture, but gay culture evolves over the years. From the dawn of, we say, the gay rights movement, maybe really coalescing in the late 60s and early 70s, that culture has changed over the decades. So there's room for something like the Bears to kind of find a place and take a new slot. Or as we see nowadays, trans people are finally getting some recognition that they didn't really have and longed for, and so it's causing a lot of social strife, but they're starting to find their place of acceptance, not just within the gay community, but within the culture.
So you were involved in the bear community?
Yeah. What had happened was a lot of the bears were nerds. They were geeky, nerdy guys. Maybe the big bearded guys at colleges and universities who were the first to have like network connections to other universities or government agencies. So they were connected online before the web even existed. This would have been back in the days of electronic bulletin board systems. And I'm a techie, nerdy geek myself and was at the dawn of that. So it turns out that these nerdy guys were really well connected before there was a web, before there was America Online or things like that. They weren't the clean-shaven pretty boys that gay culture valued so much, but they were connected. And that's kind of, you can't separate the bear community without acknowledging the technology that connected them. Over the years, bulletin boards became the web, and we started having websites where bears could meet or gather or
chat rooms or whatever.
Yeah. Started forming maybe chat rooms on AOL. Earlier, you and I, before this podcast, had talked about Bear 411 was like one of the first major sites where ultimately guys like me could find other guys like them. And a community started to kind of coalesce through that. It's changed a lot. Nowadays, we have apps that you can tap on. So we have like Growler and Scruff, and they use GPS so you can find out who is close to me. But prior to that, the internet was real important to get the bears together. In that sense, though, there were what happened was they formed clubs, fraternal organizations, right? Where they'd have monthly or twice monthly meetings. And that might just be a bar night or to go bowling, barbecue. I think another thing about the bear community, very blue collar and down to earth. That's all we ever really wanted or needed was how can I meet other guys like me?
I didn't think about it till just now, but I think it was a bear group that was doing movie night once a month in Seattle.
They still are.
And I went
in
Seattle. I did this. I had totally forgotten about that. And I'm not a bear, but
Right. Well, ultimately, a few clubs formed. And of course, San Francisco, sadly, in a lot of ways, and often New York, are the epicenters of gay culture. And the rest of the country eventually adopts or takes on some of their aspirations. At the time, right, I had been a leader in college. I had been central in the gay community through my bathhouse years and that. And the devastation of AIDS, in a lot of ways, the bears were like the last guys standing. We weren't necessarily the most desirable physical type. Ew, body hair,
Right.
You need to shave that off. Those sorts of things. And weren't necessarily popular. And in a way, almost their popularity led to their survival. So by 1990 or so, there were a lot of guys standing on the edge of the gay community kind of going, all right, how do we move forward from this? And so I ended up forming the North Country Bears in Minneapolis, which at the time was like probably the 5th or 6th in the nation. Eventually, nearly every state, or at least liberal state, ended up having one or more bear clubs, and they would have bar nights, possibly do charitable fundraising events, things like that. And it gave a chance for us guys who had been standing on the sidelines to get together and meet guys like us. They're the kind of guys that they were, interested in.
So you've got the bears coming together as a group. So why is it that now they subdivide into other groups? I'm thinking you've got the muscle bears, you've got the cigar group.
Right.
Well, you've got all these things going on. Why is that?
Well, it's because of fetishism. It's on a deep, ultimately, the bears are a fetish organization. There's something about the physical attributes of a bearded man, of a hairy man, of a big husky man. It might even be a really big chunky guy because, they're with chubs.
Oh, then you got the chub group, right?
Right. And within the chub group, you have gainers, guys who are trying to get as big as possible, and you have feeders.
That's a thing?
That's a thing. And you have like feeders who might
feed the guys that want to get
that are admirers, and they're a lot of this all ties in to kink. On a sexual level, what kind of guy turns you on? What characteristics do they have? We had the role model of the leather community, which has a broad range of kinks, not just from, the physical appearance of a man in leather, but also to some of the behaviors, whether it's dominance and submission, daddy-son kind of frameworks. But the bears ended up, as like any culture, it changes over time. So even the bears kind of stratified out. So we have like the muscle bears are kind of one layer of it. And then you have nowadays the younger people, they call them chonks.
What do you call them?
Chonks.
Chonks?
C-H-O-N-K. Yeah, he's a chonky. He's a chonky.
Chonk?
Those are the chubby ones, right?
I hadn't heard that. Okay.
That's to do it. We called them husky. In the Sears and Ward's mail order catalogs of the past, they had a special section for husky boys and men.
Well, when I was in 6th grade, I was really thin, but then I went to chunky. I think in 6th grade I went to a 36-inch waist, so I was husky. I was husky.
That surprises me.
It's way larger than I am now. But
so you were shopping in the husky section.
I was a husky shopper.
Yeah. So imagine, we kind of still have on one end of the spectrum, we have the big boys, chubs, and then we've got like the muscle bears, and then we've got kind of just the in-between thing. And then a lot in the admirer or in the younger ones, we have the otters who are young. And they might not be as hairy as they're going to be 20 years from now. They're not as heavy set. So there's room for both a fetish type that you like. And
so you're saying that an otter or a wolf would be a subdivision of the bears? I don't see it that way. Because to me, a bear is a big guy, like we talked about earlier. And obviously an otter or a wolf or whatever are not big guys. So I don't see the connection, or that I don't see them as a subgroup.
Well, within any fetish community, there's rooms for people who possess a given quality or an attribute, and those who lack that themselves but admire or desire or want that, right?
Okay, but if you use that logic, then a twink who's a chub or a bear admirer would be a bear. So that breaks down.
Not necessarily, but they might hang out with the bears.
Well, no, you're going to have admirers for whatever group you're in or whatever subgroup. But I'm just saying, to be a subgroup of something when there's no connection, I don't see it.
Right. Well, they would perceive themselves as an admirer and realize that I'm not necessarily bearish myself.
Right.
But that's something that
Okay, but how do you make the connection between an admirer and somebody that's actually in your group, a subgroup? See, that's where we're having the disconnect. Because as I said, a twink could be an admirer, but a twink is not a subgroup of a bear, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so why is a twink not, but a so-called otter or a wolf, why would they be? Just because they have some hair, so that therefore they get to be a subgroup?
That may, help kind of bridge that sort of in-between sort of state.
Okay, well then if we have drag queens with a lot of hair, then they would be a subgroup of the bears.
Well, we do have drag queens with a lot of hair. The Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence tend to be very bearish types who, put on nun drag in order to do fundraising and participate in the community. So we need to allow room. Certainly we're seeing, like with the trans issues too, we have this rainbow spectrum of stuff, and we're all just trying to find our place within a given community.
Okay, I think we're going to agree to disagree on what a bear is and what a subgroup of that is.
Well, and I don't even like being put in the position of defining it.
Okay.
But just imagine, on its most fundamental level, within my own coming out in gay activism, I am an activist for sexual freedom. And we see a big dichotomy within the queer culture in general. When I first came out, there was GLB, gay, lesbian, bisexual. That was the acronym used for our community. Social aspects. So rather than just sexual, and we have such a hard time doing this, especially in America, it is our sexuality. It is the physical sex we had that set us apart from the straight world, that made us vilified and sinners from a religious perspective, deviants from a psychological perspective, criminals from a legal perspective, when all we want to do was express ourselves sexually. It's the social aspects of queer culture that are even at a dichotomy within ourselves, right? That somehow, like America, we shouldn't be talking about sex. That's the sort, you keep that to yourself. You keep it in your bedroom, keep it off to the side. But social pressure made us change it. It ended up becoming LGB because women had been so oppressed for so long. We ended up switching the initials and starting it with L just to give women, we'll put you first. Because you've dealt with not only like the lesbian issue, but just women's rights issues. And then the trans, we then became LGBT because there was a lot of trans people. And that was confusing because there are transvestites, which get sexual fetish pleasure from cross-dressing, to people who have actual sexual, physical identity issues, right? And then over the years, we've added additional letters. So we're now at LGBTQI, which I think stands for intersectional, or I'm not even sure. And then A, or inquisitive, inquiring, maybe I was also for people who just weren't sure where they fell on the sexual spectrum. I don't know if that was like the allies or the asexual people. So now even non-sexual, asexual people needed to be included in the community, right? Q, queer, because young people, and I'm guilty of it. I'm an old school, old goat. And I still think in terms of the gay community, but anyone under 35, young people, the Gen X, Y, and Z, queer is the word that they identify and relate to. So LGBTQIA and plus. For me personally, those additional letters at the end are more about social constructs of finding your place within a community. But my own passion and interest has always been sex, because I'm a frisky guy. And my efforts at liberation, gay liberation, whether it was in college or whatever, was to just have the freedom to have the kind of sex we want to have without the church or the government dictating that to us.
Okay, I'm going to jump in here. So a couple of minutes ago, you said that sex is it's on the QT. We don't want to talk about it in America. Well, I don't agree with that, because the last time I read any news, the Republicans, that's all they're obsessed about is sex and what everybody's doing with everybody. And they're trying to control everything.
Right.
So how does that tie in? And where do you see us going with all this? Because literally they're trying to, turn us back 50 or 100 years.
Yeah. What's really sad is for all my personal involvement in the gay community over the decades, we are still fighting some of the same old battles all over again. For sexual freedom, for social freedom, for equality, for acceptance. They keep putting us in this box. And on some level, I try to stay focused on my freedom to be the sexual being I want to be. And my warrior or whatever action within the community has been tied more to that than the broader social issues. Imagine within the gay community, a lot of people worked on marriage equality or the right to just even the right to adopt or be a foster parent to children. Those are social issues, trying to find acceptance within social culture. Whereas I personally have been, my core thing is we need to be able to express ourselves sexually the way we want to. And there was a lot of crossover between the bears. There were a lot of bears within the leather community who may have been buying black boots and chaps and biker jackets and donning the garb of the leather community, but it wasn't necessarily really their scene. We just felt more closely,
it's the closest thing they could come up with.
Yeah. So when the bears started to coalesce on their very own, a lot of guys kind of drifted away from the leather community. And our clubs and organizations were different. Imagine the leather community is like, they have existed longer. They had a more established order. Their whole system of like master and slave, the master teaches the slave. So the leather community is much more structured. Their organizations had bylaws and rules. I saw in most of the other bear clubs and organizations around the country were like, look, we just like getting whisker rubs and hugging and rubbing up against big, furry, hairy guys. We get off on that.
And we want to have a hamburger social.
We want to go have a burger and go bowling,
Yeah.
And it was strange. The leather community, even some people within the gay community are like, well, you can't just get together and do that. Where are your bylaws? You need organization. You need structure. That the leather community, all the major leather clubs were very highly structured corporate. Imagine within a leather club, their hierarchy, the CEOs, they were like, well, the guy who was the head of the leather club, the treasurer, used to be a fiduciary guy for one of the stock firms, in the U.S. And then, of course, in order to come up with the bylaws, and we need to be charitable, we need to incorporate as a 501c so we can do fundraising. He used to be a banker or a lawyer, and Bears kind of went, yeah, we just want something to eat and some whisker rubs and get our rocks off. And so we didn't necessarily follow. We were a fraternal men's organization, groups, but we didn't necessarily want to follow the same model. And I'm glad we didn't. I remember once we had an event out in a restaurant, and there must have been 24 of us, right? They had to pull tables together, and other people in the restaurant were kind of noticing there's all these big, husky, bearded guys, a whole table. And this one couple kind of approached us, and asked...
a straight couple?
Yeah. They were like, are you part of like some group or something? And I remember telling them, I said, well, yeah, you've heard of and maybe you've had one in your hometown, a Moose Lodge or the Elks, kind of fraternal organization. Well, we're the Bears. It just would leave it at that and not explain necessarily that we're gay and we're just a bunch of fetishists for stuff like that. But to try to give those straight people some sort of framework,
right?
Like a Masonic temple lodge or the Elk. We found our place within the community in the early 90s. It was challenging, though, because here we are getting together. We needed to connect physically and socially, sexually with each other. But it was a scary time post-AIDS. There had been so much devastation and loss. And I remember even as a community leader thinking, well, okay, we finally found our gig and our strata within the gay community. But if we all get together and start carrying on with each other and infect each other, if we don't take care of each other, we're going to get wiped out too. So it was at the time, just the whole framework in the early 90s until there were good HIV medicines and stuff like that. It was a delicate balance trying to get these guys, and that's what we all want, is to connect, to feel connected, not just to one other person, but to feel connected to something bigger than that, to our gay community or to our clan or our tribe within that.
Are there gay groups, or are there bear groups rather, in Palm Springs?
There was. When I first came here, because I had been involved and founded the North Country Bears, I had actually left Minneapolis, moved up to the North Woods, up by Duluth Superior, and I formed a second bear club, the Backwoods Bears. And we pulled in guys from North Dakota, South Dakota, the upper part of Minnesota, the UP.
Right, I get
Michigan.
that, but I'm talking about here.
Well, when I left that and came to Palm Springs, there was still a bear club. The Palm Springs Bears were getting together for coffee every Thursday night, which worked out.
Is that still in existence or not?
No.
Did they go on a diet or what?
No. At the time, we'd meet for coffee every Thursday on the north end of downtown, and it worked out great because after coffee, we'd meet late in the afternoon, and then the street fair was on. So then you could go out to dinner or go walk the street fair, or that. We'd have pool parties at some of the gay resorts, opportunity to hang out and play.
So what happened? Why isn't there one now?
The culture shifted and changed. A bear club, a fraternal organization like that, was really important as a way to connect and meet. But sadly, it's all gone online. And now that we have apps like Growler or Scruff or things like that, you can meet other bearish men. In fact, all of our queer youth is switching from actually getting together and meeting as a community, as a club, and now they're just hanging out with their own little cliques and friends and texting, and it's really strange.
Well, that's not just in this community. That's everywhere.
Right.
I remember my ex, Jeff, and I went to the Abbey in WeHo, and we went in there. Have you been there?
No.
It's a big lobby. There's a fireplace going. It's like a huge lobby with all chairs, and you can sit around, and then the bars are off to the side. But there was, I bet, 6 or 8 gals, straight, I assume straight. They came in, got their martinis, sat along one comfortable bench. And we sat there because we like people watching for about an hour. Literally not one of them said a word to another person in the group. They were all on their phones for 1 hour while we were watching. And so it's not just in the gay community. It's like, this is what's happening in the world
broader
today.
Culture. Yeah. We are, so... And all that's the way the world is. But it runs counter to me, where the trajectory of my life has been to draw people together and give them a sense of community and formats and opportunities to interact face to face with each other. And now it's become so digital and remote and disconnected, and people feel frustrated. You hear that frustration even by younger queer people. They don't feel connected on warmer, more human levels to a bigger, broader community that is there to support them and to welcome them.
Well, I haven't been there in a while, but it seems like Hunters on Friday night, isn't that kind of a bearish gathering on Friday nights?
That has been going on a long time. They have the cheapest cocktail in town on Fridays during, what do they call it, like for something, $2 cocktails. As somebody now on Social Security, I joke with everybody, I have to go there. I'm not a drinker. I have one cocktail a week that's at Hunter's for Friday.
Oh, so there is something going on then.
Yeah, but it's such a mixed crowd there,
Well, the other thing is when I noticed, because I moved to Palm Springs almost 6 years ago, it seems like you go to some of these quote-unquote mixers and people don't mix at all. They're in cliques.
Cliques.
And it's really hard to break into any of that.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. And technology is sort of only making that worse. But
Right.
I've always worked, at least, in my kind of roles that I've played within the gay community, was to try to get people together and to mix and to integrate and feel like they were part of something bigger than just themselves or the clique they hang out with. We do have International Bear Convergence is coming up at the end of February. It's a huge event. The Renaissance Hotel on Tockwitz has the largest swimming pool in the valley. And
so is that where it's going to be? And it's not going to be at whatever. What's the other place?
Years ago, it was held at the Renaissance. And for me to see that pool filled with men in the whole surrounding courtyard.
Yeah, but what's on Indian Canyon, though? Because it's been...
Okay, so now it's at the Hard Rock or Zoso.
Right.
Is
so
where
they're not doing it at the Renaissance, right?
Not anymore.
Okay, all right. Because I thought you were saying it's going back there. All right.
No, I wish it was. But that's going to be a major event. So there is a bear circuit where there's Texas Bear Roundup, and Phoenix or Tucson has a major bear event, Chicago, around the country. Sadly, and there's a lot of circuits, whether it's the white party, club kid dance kind of circuit, within the gay community. Sadly, that's for a lot of people who have money to travel.
Right.
Can buy airfare and spend $300 a night on a hotel and VIP passes to the event. But I'm looking forward to International Bear Convergence just because for anybody who identifies as a bear man within the gay community, a chance to see hundreds and hundreds of us all gathered together, bears and admirers, muscle bears, chunky bears, otters and admirers, all gathered in a huge space, helps give us a sense that we're part of there's guys like us, that this is our tribe, this is our community, and that's very important in our disconnected, technological, isolated worlds that we live in.
So any final thoughts on bears?
Okay. They evolved. The whole notion of bears finally emerging kind of late to the game within the gay community and finding their place by the 1990s was a great thing, because I personally and a lot of other people found, okay, we found our slot within the gay community. And we've, since the 1990s, so we're 3 decades into it, the bears are a visible, known entity in force. We found our place within our community. And even you see on pop culture and TV, comedy shows and stuff, you'll hear little bear jokes thrown around here and there. So that's a good thing. And I found my opportunities to provide leadership and community building within the bear community personally, and I know a lot of other people were great, I found my place with, my clan within this big tribe of ours. So that's a good thing.
All right. Thank you for coming in again today.
All right. It's been
talking
great.
About bars.
All right.
Thanks again.